to Watercolor by Scarlett Damen. That's me, of course. Today we're talking about blending. So last night I went ahead and I did a few little swatches here, some studies, and I simply started with wet paper and dropped in my color. Here I started with wet paper, drew 2 lines, and then pulled the paint through the middle. Here again, started with wet paper and then dropped in some green and some blue and allowed these colors to just mix on the surface. So I want to take a moment to show you how this works, but I also want to show you what it's going to look like. So blending can look like all kinds of fun things. Now I showed you this in yesterday's tutorial, but I think it's quite relevant. When you're blending, you don't have to blend perfectly. The 2 colors don't have to be like the rainbow. They don't have to merge. They can just sit next to each other, but they also don't have to have a dark line. You don't have to have, like here, all these crispy edges. So I'm going to show you how to get the 2 colors without the crispy edge and how to get 2 colors with a crispy edge, but how to make the color blend naturally on the surface of the paper for you. So I have a tutorial called 3 ways to mix paint or blend paint. Actually, I think I have a few videos on blending. So I will link some of those up in the corner for you guys if you want to know more or see how I've done it in other things. Okay, so I've gone ahead and put some water on the page. Now, because there's water on the page and there's water in my brush, this is called wet and wet. And that's very useful to know when people are talking about wet and wet, that they're talking about dropping wet paint onto wet paper. So I'm just dropping the paint, that's all. Just dropping it wherever I want it to be. And you can drop a lot of paint, you can drop more paint, thicker paint, you can drop paint into paint. That's 2 colors that are now on top of each other. Literally, one is on top of the other, and they're pushing each other out of the way, and they'll move and change as the paper dries. Now down here, if I go out a bit, you can see there's a hard edge. So this is because the paper is dry here, whereas wet in the circle. So in the circle, any paint that I've put in the circle is going to gently bleed. You're going to get all these lovely soft edges, whereas any paint that is on dry paper is going to have a crispy edge or a hard edge. So there we go. Straight paint on dry. This is going to have nice, sharp, crispy edges. So depending on what you're drawing, if you were, putting together a tree of some kind, and you wanted, say you wanted the branches to be nice and sharp, right? It's not exactly the right brush to use to do branches, but let's imagine this is a tree for a moment. These are going to have nice, sharp lines, which is very useful if we're drawing a house. You want the bricks, you don't want them bleeding out into the surrounding, so you want to paint wet paint onto dry paper. If on the other hand, let's see, we come back to our tree here, on the other hand you want to add some foliage, I'm going to add some water and then come and drop the colors in. Now of course I could drop the colors in and make it all one by adding all the same color, or because this is foliage and trees generally have different colors in them, I could do a few dots, and then I'm going to come back and drop in a few more. Now, there's a lot more water on the brush when I did that, but now the 2 colors are going to blend together. And then I come back and maybe just tap in a little bit in the core. And because the page is not completely dry, some of these spots are going to have the natural shape, the shape that the brush, the footprint of the brush as I place it here, and they won't move. And in other places where I tap this and it hits a wet surface underneath, it's going to blend out. So we're dappling the paint along the side of this very oddly shaped little tree. Come back and drop in a lighter color and allow the 2 to blend. Now if I was also thinking about sunlight and lights and darks, I would take a moment to add more dark to the core, or where the shadows might be, right? And I would add more light, let's say, where I feel that the sunlight might be catching the silhouette. So maybe up here there's a little more light. Maybe in here. Whatever. So this is it's like backlit. Since I've done this, everything else is kind of dried. Here we can see that the two colors have blended together. Now, the brown, it's not the best example of two colors because you can't really see either one, but that's okay. So over here on our little tree stump, let's imagine we wanted to put in more colors. Maybe we know the sun's coming from the back and from the right, so maybe we want to come and add some yellow or some version of yellow or orange or even a tad of green. Something that's bright and beautiful with something darker. Okay, and I just want the two colors to blend naturally on the page here. I'm not pulling my brush through them too many times. Come back and maybe drop in some brown here. And up here. Okay, so this is one really simple way to blend. Just drop the paint onto the page, obviously where you want it. So that's what I've done over here as well. This is a beautiful example of bleeding. There's a lot of black backgrounds going on. I didn't add extra water. So I put this down, dropped a few drops like so. Again, let's make it a little thicker. Okay, and I believe it would have been great if I'd put notes. I do tend to write notes. In fact, I always suggest that when you're doing a study, you write in all your notes of what your colors are, or how long you waited before you drop something in, or if you're learning, if you're experimenting, if you're having fun, it's really nice to be able to come back and look at that and have a reference, know what it stood for. So this, I believe, was indigo, which is here. So we'll drop some indigo, and I have it all the way across the top. Straight line on the top. And then there's a blob there, some there, comes down that way. And there's a few little blobs in the middle. We're actually going to talk about painting with blobs in an upcoming tutorial in October. There's an art form typically used or typically done with pen and ink, painting with blobs, and it's very pretty and interesting and very intuitive, and I think that you guys might find it fun. So this is what this looked like before it dried. This, unfortunately, looks beautiful, whereas when it dries, you are going to lose some of that magic. So if that's what you're going for, that amazing magic, there are ways to keep it where the paint has more of a shine. There are mediums that you can actually add that will help your paint keep a shine. And again, we're going to talk about that also in a tutorial in October. Talking about different mediums, different things we can add to the paint to change and make the paint even more beautiful. This, however, is gorgeous. I think it's gorgeous too, but that's a good example. So these two colors are just going to exist together, and they might mix a bit, especially if we were to move the paper. You can see them move a little more. So here I have done 3 lines, one on the bottom, one on the top. And this is a cerulean blue and maybe a Paris blue? No. Okay. Cobalt blue. Let's do that. Okay, so cobalt blue on the bottom. The colors do not matter. So don't worry about that, guys. Just go ahead and mix whatever you feel like mixing. So I've got a good color, a good amount of that on the page. And then the top, let's use a cerulean blue. And let's go back and forth. Just pull a wet brush through the two colors and they will naturally bleed on their own. Okay, so give the two colors time and they're going to blend together. Now we could come back also and add more. So this is what this looked like before it had a chance to dry. Some blue. Now when blending your colors, you don't just have to let them blend on their own. You can also take the time to blend them yourself on the paper. I'm going to do what's over here. So now taking a smaller brush, that's going to be the big key here. Taking a smaller brush and a small amount of paint, we can ever so gently blend the two together. Okay, just by painting them on. So as I'm going back and forth here, these two colors are becoming one color. They're becoming a totally new color right in the middle. So from here, I would let this dry, and then if I wanted to, come back and add on a second layer. Now I haven't painted underneath, this is wet on dry. I'm just working back a little bit into that blue. Adding more brown. Now remembering tone and shape and form, it is always good to have some kind of shadow somewhere. So I want to come up here and perhaps take away these hard edges. Okay, so these are just a few examples of how you can blend or allow the paint to bleed and move around. And over here we can come back to the little tree and see that it is actually quite cute. If I wanted to come back and add some more, define some of these lines, you can see that this would be the perfect time to do that. You give some more shadows underneath. So it's your painting, your watercolor painting. You can play and have fun as much as you want. Unless it is sold, it is all practice. Do not worry about your paper or anything else. Just have fun. The more practice we have, the better we get. So here I'm going to add in some green and again let this blend. This is kind of like stippling. I will have a tutorial. Stippling is also on my list of October classes. Not quite like this stippling, but the more traditional old style stippling. Oh, there we go. And we're going to add a little glazing because I'm just having a little bit of fun here. Now if you've gone over like I just did and you wanted to remove that, clean your brush, come back with clean water and just go over it and lift it off. Clean your brush again, wiggle on top, dry your brush, come back. You're like scooping it off. This itty bitty little spot I went over on. So making a mistake does not mean the painting is over. Of course, this is all a study, so it doesn't matter, right? But that was a perfect example of messing up and fixing it. So there we go, blending, how to blend watercolor, a few different methods of how to blend watercolor. Now I have other videos which talk about how to blend watercolor botanically when I'm painting a peony, I believe. And I have another one where I talk about more of this same thing, but in a different style, a different setup. So I will link those above. And this will be on Patreon as its own post with a downloadable version of what I've got here, more text. If I find anything else I think is interesting, I'll add it in there. So whatever there will be, it'll all be available on Patreon as well as a YouTube extras post to go along with this one. Thanks for watching. I'm Scarlett, and I'll see you in tomorrow's tutorial. Toodaloo.